welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. This is our second episode of the Accessibility Playlist. Thanks for popping in this morning. Let's see, who have we got in so far? Dawn, Roger, Shanna, Dimashea, Colin, and Kate Daniels. Toddy just popped in. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for popping in this morning. Really appreciate you being here. Good morning. And I'm very happy to have as our guest this morning, Jean Marrapodi, who is a friend of TLDC. I have known Jean forever. I remember Jean still the first time that I met you was at Learning Solutions in Orlando, and Heidi Fisk assigned me to help you with something. And so I ended up spending most of the event kind of trailing you here and there to kind of help some of your, I think you were doing like a, I don't know, like a hallway sort of project.
Stages.
But it was fun, and you were so fun to work with. And obviously you have a passion for helping people and a passion as an educator. And I've known you through the years. So I really appreciate you being here and helping with this particular topic, which we had our first session last week with Susan Nabone-Beck, and she talked about Storyline 360 and accessibility, and we went over some of the platform specifics with that, and it was great. I actually have never really thought as much as I probably should about accessibility, and I know that this is a topic that you're passionate about, and I did have like one question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
About before I ask you to introduce yourself, of course, but when you are building things out, where the accessibility piece, where do you prioritize it whenever you are creating, e-learning?
I work with a universal design philosophy, so I will often put alternatives in, especially the group that I'm talking about today with the low literacy and English language learners, where you really have to be thinking throughout. You can't just add it as a layer on the top. And so it's important that it's integrated throughout the whole thing.
Wow. So, and that doesn't seem like it's typical. Yeah, and it probably should be, right?
Well, yeah, it really depends on your audience and how broad your audience is. I have a story about that. When I was doing training at a bank, and I had a compliance officer who wanted us to do training on information security, she handed me the equivalent of a college course, and she wanted me to turn it into e-learning for the whole bank. And she didn't understand that most of the people weren't going to understand what she was trying to get them to read through. And she said, I don't care that they understand it. I don't care that they do it. I just care that we check the box. And so I told her the story about Terry Teller, who recently graduated from Dorchester High School by the skin of her teeth, who has great people skills and is good, and helped her to see that her audience was not the corporate people she was used to dealing with. And that made a huge difference for her in understanding you can't speak to your peers if you have a broad audience like that.
Right. Oh man, I can totally imagine you pulling that one off, Gene.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to? Your background. Let our audience know.
Sure. Recently, I moved to the Boston metro area after being in Providence for 25 years. I have been in corporate training and higher ed training for the bulk of my career. I was one of the early pioneers for e-learning. And got moved from company to company to start their e-learning programs. Currently, I'm with Mass Mutual, which is a big insurance company here in Boston, Springfield, Massachusetts, and was hired to work with their financial literacy initiative and just get that more learner-centric. And they decided to sunset that program and redeployed our team. And I wound up on web content strategy. So I'm part of the people who build the website, which needs work. But it's been a very interesting world. I was the learning person in the geek space in digital experience. And it's been very different being not with my peers, but being with the business. So it's been a great learning experience.
And I've never, you really are an e-learning pioneer. You were there like way back when.
I was.
You're here with us today.
I really was. I was there in the late 90s building out stuff and
Mhm.
figuring stuff out and doing stuff that didn't work
Right.
and learning what didn't do. I was at some of the very first e-learning conferences too when it was small, and that was fun. That was fun.
You were part of
Really.
that.
Yeah. 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 Love being part of everything and love seeing all these familiar names. So
All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over, and thank you again, Jean. I'm looking forward to hearing what you got to say today.
great, fantastic. Well, I hopefully you guys can all see my screen. We're going to talk about No Learner Left Behind, and we're going to talk about a group that nobody ever talks about with low literacy, and we're going to talk about what doesn't work and why it doesn't work when we're thinking about them. If you've been in the US for a while, you've heard No Child Left Behind, not a terribly successful program, but the idea was great. That's where we brought in standards-based education, and it was intended to eliminate the gap. And that's what I am referencing here. And it was replaced in December 2015 with Every Student Succeeds, and consequently has been replaced with a bunch of stuff. But that was helping to address that there are broader categories in learning than we necessarily think about. So I want you to think about that. Is there a bell curve in adult learning? Do we have people that fall here? Well, yeah, we do. Our ESL, our second language learners, our reading challenged and our learning disabled tend to fall at the bottom end of things. And we really need to be thinking about ways we can scaffold learning for them. We live in the world of magical thinking. If we build it, they'll come. And if I build it, they will learn. Not true. Not true. Our traditional Kirkpatrick model, we look at, did they like it? Did they learn it? Did the behavior change? And what was the ROI? But do we ever really evaluate the learning vehicle? If our learners are failing, it may be our fault. And we have to own that, and we have to be willing to work a little differently. Well, no learner left behind. It's like a race to keep everybody, like the Boston Marathon. It's all about crossing the finish line. Doesn't matter how long it takes, but it's getting there. So here's an example for me where I was in the position that some of our learners were in. I was asked to moderate a simulation. It was a business simulation, and they handed us charts that looked like this, and we were supposed to figure them out, analyze them, and make next steps. And they wanted me to be coaching students on this. I was totally befuddled. This is way outside of my bailiwick. And so my reaction was, this makes no sense to me. I didn't have the context for it because I don't have the business background. I was teaching at a business school, but I was teaching HR stuff, and I don't have that business expertise. So the first thing we have to do when we're working with our students is we want to ensure that the level of learning is appropriate for the level of learner. We don't want to make it too hard for them. And sometimes we do that because we don't understand where they are. I want you to just scan this and see what you think there. What do you when you look at this, what's your first thought? Bleh, probably. You look at that and it becomes overwhelming. Well, that's what it feels like for our low learners if we throw e-learning at them that we're requiring them to read that's over their head. I'm going to skip some of the what made that difficult because we have to play with we have to play a little bit with the technology. So what made that difficult was the reading level. The reading level was very high on that. So rule number 2, we have to remember that students learn in an environment that's physically and emotionally safe for students. If we put them in a situation of frustration, it no longer becomes emotionally safe for them. This is Adrian, and I have a clip that doesn't work, so we're going to paste a link into the chat for this, and I want you just to listen for a minute to Adrian trying to read this. Let me go back to our chat, and I want you just to listen for, I don't know, 30 seconds or so and tell me what you think. Links in the chat.
So folks, give that YouTube link a click. And Gene, there is a great question from Toddy in the ask a question section at the bottom of the screen. If you feel like taking a
From
look at the video,
Toddy at the bottom of the screen. Let me
like
look for
go down on the lower border of the screen. There's a row of
Oh,
things.
gotcha. Ask a question.
There you go.
Oh, good question. The term ESL, ELL are interchangeable. ESL actually is coming back again. English for language learners, we're seeing just EL. It varies quite a bit in the different industries. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so you've gotten a chance to hear Adrian reading. What are you noticing? Yeah, English is a second language. Really, that's what has gotten discouraged because of the connotation that English language learners in the US, it's probably not a second, it's probably a fourth or fifth language. That's where they're going. Adrian was not ESL. Adrian is a native born American. Adrian was a dyslexic student, a student with dyslexia that I wound up tutoring with, who read about at a second grade level. And he may be like some of the students in some of the programs that you're in. Imagine looking at your e-learning from that level. I mean, just think about what that would be like if you read like Adrian reads, what it might be like to be working in your setting. So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to share again. I want to talk about the difference with the way we learn and the way some of our learners learn. So a couple things to remember. Literate learners are used to learning from print. Non-literate learners are used to learning by doing and watching. Literate learners tend to be visually oriented. Non-literate learners tend to be orally, with your ear. They tend to hear and they tend to watch and figure things out. Literate learners make lists to remember. Non-literate learners will repeat to remember, and they'll tell themselves things to help them. Literate learners have spent years learning to read, and non-literate learners have limited time for learning to read. You know, if they become part of literacy volunteers, they maybe get an hour a week, and catching up is very, very difficult. Literate learners know that they can learn, but non-literate learners lack confidence in their learning ability. So they're coming at this with, this is going to be hard, I'm not going to be able to do this. So they kind of defeat us in the beginning. Literate learners can distinguish between important and less important points, and non-literate learners accept all content being of equal value. So if they take a quiz on something, they will have remembered the minutia as opposed to generalizing the main points. That's really important to remember. You have to be very explicit with what's key for them. Otherwise, they'll miss what you're trying to do. So you want to check the reading level. You want to keep your sentences short. You want to limit text on the page. You want to keep vocabulary simple. Add audio whenever you can. Illustrate everything. And we're going to talk about illustration in a minute. Readability is this enigma. People don't really understand how readability is determined, but the science behind it is the ratio between sentence length and number of syllables. There's a ton of formulas. Fry, Fleisch, Kincaid, Lexiles are some of the more common ones. And it's easiest to calculate it online. Back in the olden days, we had to count number of sentences, count number of syllables, count number of words, and do all kinds of math. But the longer words tend to be higher, more syllables. Those are some baseline things. And I'm going to skip this check readability in Word 2006 because Microsoft recently updated and they have made their readability stuff disappear in Office 365 and 216. They they have lumped it into accessibility, but they really haven't. You have to kind of go to the background of things. It used to be you could check spelling and toggle a button on to see readability, and it would give you the readability here. You can't find that anymore. So we're going to talk about doing readability online, and I'm gonna show you a couple of things that we can do readability in, and I'm going to share my entire screen, and we're going to do this and go here and here and here. All right, so this should share everything. There we go. All right, I want to close my message here. There we go. Oh, well, look at that. That's kind of fun. In and in and in and in. Let me come back to my presentation here. And there's a bunch of online tools, but I want to look in particular at this particular example. Doug is rearranging the pallets using a forklift. Is Doug performing the operation correctly? What do you think that would be rated as if you were going to do a reading level? And let's see if I can do this. Yeah, where do you think that is? Doug is rearranging pallets. We got a grade 4.5. We got a C, we got a 6.1, 9.0. Well, let's take a look at it and some of the tools and see what we get. I'm going to come big here, and I'm going to go into readability test tool. One of them, when you Google for them, this one comes up high because they've done a lot of SEO. So let's calculate the readability on this with readability test tool. And it's coming out 9th grade, 14th grade, 8th grade, 17th. Yeah, Well, that's funky. I wonder why it's so high. Let's try another one. Here is from onlineutility.org. Doug is rearranging the pallets. We'll process the text. And this puts it at needing to be halfway through 8th grade and shows the higher grades. All right, well, that's just bizarre. 2 out of 2. Let's try one more just for grins and giggles. And we'll use the free version of Readable and see what comes out. And this is going to try to upsell us to the more expensive one. And it's going to take forever. So I think we may skip that one and come back to where we were. All right. So why do you think that came up so high? I don't know how I can do this so that you're just seeing me and not my, oh, I can turn my video off. That's how. Let me do that. Oh, wow. What did that do? Are you guys seeing 100 version? Let me stop sharing and share again. And let's see if we can get that to just share one screen. Any idea why that came so high? Well, there that goes again. I'm not quite sure why it's giving us the eternal word here. Let me unshare. Lewis, if you have an idea on why I'm doing this.
You have to share your PowerPoint slide. Right now, I think it's just sharing your desktop.
Yeah, okay, let me come back to my PowerPoint then. Stop sharing. And we'll put this back up here. So why so high? I mean, it doesn't look like it's particularly difficult. Correctly, yeah, correctly a suspect, operation, rearranging, forklift. There aren't very many long words, but there are words that are uncommon for readability to measure. When I did this in Word's version, it still came out high. So how do we fix things like that? It sounded like it was easy. Well, here's an easier one. Doug moves the boxes with a forklift. Is he doing this right? That comes out much better when we're doing that. And this one actually came out to grade 3 with what we had to make it a little, well, actually, I take that back. Flesh Kincaid had it as at a 0.05 because it was lower, because it's simple words. Forklift was a compound word, so that makes it that much easier. But what we want to come back even more to what the learning objective was. Is it for the learner to read it, or is it for them to identify warehouse terminology? If it's about learning the things, then let's help them learn things. And if it's about moving pallets safely, then let's focus on that and help and equip them with that. So we can do things in e-learning by labeling them, putting a sound for the word and pointing arrows at it so that they can see those kinds of things and make it simple for them instead of defining with big long words that are going to be very difficult for them. We can scaffold the learning by adding hyperlinks. Businessdictionary.com does a great version of that where they can click on it and they have an option of having it spoken, or it can link to a glossary. But be careful that your glossary isn't very goopy. If the glossary is supposed to help scaffold for limited language learners, make sure it's written at a low level. Here, this data integrity word, this is a paragraph. This is a level 15.4. That's a junior in college. We don't do that. Learning is much lower. This is a woman speaking in Haitian Creole, and because our sound isn't working, I wanted you to experience what it's like not understanding what she's saying. So I can paste that in the chat for you. Let me come back to my Haitian Creole and find her. Oh, no, I don't have that. Let me pull the link off of here. Maybe not. I'm going to put a link in the chat for you on that. I want you to listen for a little bit and see if you can tell me what she's talking about. Thanks for the infinity portal. When you have an idea what she's talking about, type in the chat. Yeah, laddering tidy, like we're talking about, is adding as much as you can to support them. Having oral, audio as well as visual. Oh, you have captions on. Cheating. Okay, so Dan is figuring out a little bit. Are you able to understand all of what she's talking about? Yeah, no, we get pieces. And that's what it's like for our learners who don't understand what we're trying to bring across to them. So let me come back to my presentation and let me share it again. And let's talk a little bit about translation and other things that we need to think about here. Right. So it's hard to figure out what they're talking about, though you do pick up a little of it. The translation is hard, though Haitian Creole has some similarities if you studied any of the Romance languages, but you're picking up pieces, you're not getting the whole thing. For an English language learner, that's what it's like when they're reading your stuff. And there's something to think about when you think about language learners. We have a bunch of different ones. When I have worked with people who were illiterate in their native language. So when they come to the United States, everything is new. The reading is completely new to them. The Somalis, the Hmongs, the Liberians were completely illiterate that we had. Yet our Liberian folks spoke English, and I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. We have people who are literate in their native language, and they have the same alphabet, like our Hispanic learners in German. It's a little easier for them to learn because they're not learning a new language. But think about people who are literate where the new language is in a new alphabet, like Arabic and Chinese. You have one more layer that's in there. And then we have folks who arrive in the US who are literate, who were educated in the new language. They can read and write, and they're learning to speak. Many Chinese and Korean people come speaking English, but there's still a lot that doesn't make sense to them. There's a lot of idioms, there's a lot of things that make it difficult. So when we talk about language learners, we can't group them all into one. Now, depending on your company, you may or may not have any folks who are totally illiterate who rely on hearing everything. But it's a process, and there's layers of things. Now, I want to share Annie with you. And Annie, I'm going to put a link in chat for you of her explaining something. And I want to give you a quiz on it when we're all done. And I had that up and I lost it again. This is Annie. Annie is one of the students that I worked at for many years. And Annie was a real sweetheart. And here comes Annie's link for you. And I want you to tell me what Annie is trying to teach you how to do. So the link is in chat. Okay. I'm going to give you a quiz because after all, you just heard that. So let's take a little quiz on that and see how you do. Oh, some kind of cooking. Okay. Let's see if you were right. Okay, what's Annie describing? And if you guessed B, you were right. She was talking about making fufu. Where did it go after it was cooked on the stove? Put it in the microwave, which is kind of fun coming from Liberia. Okay, now go ahead. You do it. Now you've seen it. You should know how to do this. How does that feel? Let's answer in chat. How does it feel having seen that, understood a little of it, but now you have to function in it? Yeah. Why does it not feel great? Yeah, it feels like you're set adrift, Jason. That's really good. Yeah, you're totally lost. And that's the feeling that your folks get. And I want you to hold on to that feeling and remember that. That's really important to understand when you're working with this kind of population. You want to remember that that's the way it feels. We don't want to do that. It was hard, and this is what fufu looks like, and this is how fufu is served. In case you're ever in a Liberian restaurant and you order it, it's kind of this gelatinous sort of neutral stuff, kind of like, I think it's poi in Hawaii. It's similar to that. So when you're creating for language learners, you remember that they're learning the language and it's a developmental process, and that the learners you have are all going to be at different levels. They're also learning the culture, and there's many cultural variations. You know, when we put Americanisms in our training, people don't often understand what kind of things are. We have national, regional, and corporate cultures that they have to adapt to that are different from what it is at home. If you've ever been overseas, you know how foreign it felt. And there are different background assumptions, so be careful not to be ethnocentric, stuck in your American thinking for things. This is one more. I'm gonna exit out of. I'm gonna give you a link to this now. Put your volume down. I will tell you this is loud, 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 loud. So learn something new here, if nothing else. Okay. Click that and turn your volume down and see if you recognize what's going on here. I often have people who recognize this one. And you don't have to listen to the whole clip. I just want you to get a feel for it. Yeah, you're right. It is Shakespeare. What can you tell about the character just from what you're seeing? Yeah, it's a comedy, manic. He's a little loony. Most definitely. Most definitely. Well, if you were an English major, let me turn the click here. Let's see if you can answer. Why did that go away? Come back. All right. Let's see if you can answer some of the questions. What was Lancelot's problem? He was anti-Semitic. He was being chased. He was making a decision. He was frightened. Who is the fiend? Bassiano, Livery, the Jew, evil thoughts, Portia. What is a livery? A hatchery, some clothing, stable, or boots? And who is the Jew? Schumann, Abraham, Shylock, Portia. The cobwebs might be clearing and it might be coming back now. This is actually, yeah, well, what made that hard and what made that easy for you? I lost my crowdcast. Let me see if I can find us again. Love the sound of it. You're right. You have to listen more than once. Yeah, he's describing stuff. Yeah, you know, in listening to all those details, you don't have any context for what's going on. That was actually from The Merchant of Venice, which if you were a, person who loves Shakespeare and used to that, you might have recognized that. Let me come back and share one more time. That was actually from a production at Trinity Repertory Company a couple years ago. And it was from the Merchant of Venice. And he's a servant, and his master is very angry with him, and he's fearful in there. So some tips for you for language learners. You want to use lots of visuals. You want to be as concrete as possible. That picture of the $20 bills on the clothesline, an American would recognize that as money laundering. A language learner would wonder why in the world the money got wet and why you were hanging it out to dry. It would make no sense to them. So you have to be Captain Obvious when you have a large language learner population. You want to avoid idioms. You want to simplify your vocabulary. You want to speak slowly. And as some of you noted in listening to things, you want to allow for repetition. So you want to be sure to set things so that the learner can repeat things, so that they can go over it once or twice or 3 times if they need to figure it out, what's going on. All right, now when we talk about images, what the heck does this mean? Well, ESL learners thought this was we know it's headache, but some of them thought it was fever or worried or sleep or busy. They don't have the conventions. Well, we know this means she's got a thought, but they thought talking, screaming, a woman's brain, something about to hit the woman's head, or rain is coming. No clue. Here again, when you zoom in on things, they thought this was a basketball and a backboard, or a computer monitor, or a tire, or a book and stereo speaker. They don't have that context to know. Especially your lower literacy people, they only recognize photographs of things. What is this? Well, it's a clock. Well, it's an arrow counting the minutes. It's an arrow showing movement. It's guidance for the shorthand. Shadow cast by the hand? No clue. Here, it's a family, teachers and students watching something, screaming, taking a picture. They don't necessarily know that. So when you're learning a new language, something to remember: first languages are caught, additional languages are taught. It's best learned in context, and there's parallel learning here. It's an acquired system, what goes on in the subconscious, and then a learned system through formal instruction. If they haven't had the formal instruction, there's going to be gaps. The best learning is working at their existing language plus a little more. So what? Well, you want to put yourself in their shoes, and hopefully you've had enough exposure to ways to do that today to remember what it's like. You want to use meta strategies to consider elements beyond the process and the content to help scaffold for things. And you want to leverage focus groups to benchmark. So if you know you have a big ESL population or language learning population, create a focus group and talk to them and show them some of the things and ask for their help. They're very good about sharing what they need. So here's my contact information. And now I'm going to jump in here to answer some questions. So what questions do you have? I saw one question pop up here about laddering, and hopefully I've given some scaffolding. Scaffolding is the official education word for that to do. You want to build your concepts slowly and not assume that they've got it all at once. With that, what other questions do you have about ESL and what we talked about today? I have a handout that actually, I wonder if I put my Dropbox link in here.
Gene, I have a question for you. I'm wondering, how did you get into this? How did you get into working ESL and, the low literacy stuff? I'm curious about that.
I literally stumbled into this when I was at a church, in my church in Providence that I attended for many years. We had a guy who started coming in my Sunday school class who couldn't read. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I'll work with him. And he was American. And then we had a whole slew of Liberian refugees show up. And the Liberian refugees came to the United States not speaking English. They were from the village. Most of the Liberians that came to the US were English speakers, but this particular group were their parents from the village, and they had never touched a pencil, pen, or book. It was great. And they wanted to read the Bible in church. And so I got involved with literacy volunteers and learned how to do it. I had also in my undergrad work, was a special educator, but I had to throw everything out I knew about reading and figure it all out again. And so as I did my doctoral work, I did a lot of work on metacognition and literacy, and actually wound up presenting in LESLA, which is Limited English Second Language Learner Acquisition. And I wound up doing presentations in Minneapolis and in Finland. That was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Todd has this question. She's asking if you're fluent in any other languages, and she's asking because she became more Spanish literate herself when she had ESL students in Southern Arizona, and she felt she needed to better understand the nuances of their native language. So, is it Liberian?
I speak enough Spanish to get by, but I do not speak any of the Liberian. And in the 8 people that I wound up in my class, they spoke 2 different languages, so they couldn't even communicate with each other except using English.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Is there anything that are there any tools or any particular resources that you gravitate toward more when you're building stuff like this out? Is there something that do you have any go-tos or resources at all?
Well, I check the I check the readability and make sure that the readability is low. I actually have a handout here, and if I can open up Dropbox, I'll put the Dropbox link on that talks about the different levels that you have when you're learning English and where they measure. English is learned developmentally, and the thing to know is that it kind of goes listening, speaking, reading, writing. Writing comes last, and folks who have been studying English for a while still may have a lot of issues with their writing, mixing up words, putting in cognates, a variety of different things. So the trick is thinking concrete as much as possible. I'm trying to get this I can't pop a PDF in the chat like I can in Slack, right?
No. You could link to it, but yeah, it doesn't hold any files.
Yeah. And it varies with the level of education that the people that come to the United States come. Stuff that I could use with Adrian, I could use with my Liberians, and was very successful with that because it was low level. Now you have to be careful that your upper level people, your non-English language learners don't feel insulted that you're making stuff so low. That's always a battle. You can always head that off in the beginning, and sometimes they appreciate the simplicity of things. Doing cartoon kind of things, you can have things very simple, but cartoons, you can have the whole image thing that your literate people aren't going to understand. I think I'm going to just have to send an email to you, Louis, because this.
Yeah, Connie said that she just posted they're the same as your website links because she just posted a link to one of your presentations there.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, I have a bunch of links and a bunch of literacy things. If you want to see, one of the most fascinating things that came out of all this was drawing, and I did some drawing stuff, and the drawing that these 70, 80-year-old people gave me was the same as what a 4- and 5-year-old would draw. That was phenomenal to see that.
See Jason's question in there. Do you have suggestions for, or perhaps could point us to further resources about ways we could take these principles and generalize them for other learning? Thinking here,
Oh
UDL.
yes, universal design for learning. Universal design really helps because in UDL you think about ways people take in information and ways people have to give it back to you. You know, multiple choice answers are not always the only way to do things. Universal design allows for variety. With your dyslexic learner, you can allow them to speak things. Adrian, who you saw trying to read, one of his goals was to get a driver's license, and he did. And the way he did it was because in Rhode Island, they had to make accommodation and they had a computerized version of the test that read the questions. And he knew enough when he was hearing things that he heard one of them that the answers were not in the same order that they were written. And he pointed that out to the examiner. He aced the exam and he passed his driving test, and he did great because we were testing if he knew the rules of the road, not if he could read. And that's a thing to think about. What are you actually trying to get across to folks?
That's interesting. I'm gonna pop myself up. We wrap up. So what's interesting to me is that I know that when you're building, say, web copy, the general best practice is to write for the third grade level. And so there are tools out there like, say, Hemingway and even Grammarly, things like that, um, that will actually sort of scan or analyze your writing to make sure that you're sort of, you're at that level. And you could go out and you can see lots of like, especially content marketing stuff. They will break it down so that it is really, really easy to understand. Do you,
Right?
is that something that, is that part of this whole scenario, the accessibility concept? Yeah.
It is. Normally, when we think accessibility in e-learning, we think about putting the descriptors of pictures in the back and making it so JAWS can read. If you've ever listened to JAWS, oh boy, what a mess we make of things. And hopefully you'll have somebody present on that. I know Michael Getz at Illumina does stuff on that, and they have learned a lot about it, and they work with the Carroll Center for the Blind and have learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Jaws in our first episode. Just how, you know, just how it really can make a mess of things, especially with numbers and um, that type of thing.
And the kicker is that blind people who are used to reading JAWS do it at 3 or 4 times speed. They speed it up to listen, and you just think, "Listen very fast like this. How could you do it?" But they're used to that.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gene. Thank you so much for sharing your morning with us and for sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate you doing this today.
Thank you so much, and thanks for those of you that came. Feel free to throw questions at me, and I'll be around if you need me again.
Yeah, I'm gonna get this one formatted and posted. Really, really useful. I think that I'm learning a lot more in this accessibility playlist so far than I even realized. So I know that this is definitely benefiting me. I almost feel a little guilty that it's I'm getting as much out of it as I am. But coming up, I think we have Alan Natachu is wanting to do a playlist episode. We have a few other people that we still have to book on the schedule, but you guys, thanks for coming in. Thank you, Gene. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Great. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.